Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are continuing in The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris. We are in Book 2, Chapter 10, this entitled Of the Desert House and the Chamber of Love in the Wilderness. Then in a while they grew sober and went on their ways, and the sun was westering behind them and casting long shadows. And in a little while they were come out of the thick woods, and were in a country of steep little valleys, grassy, besprinkled with trees and brushes, with hills of sandstone going up from them, which were often broken into cliffs, rising sheer from the tree-beset bottoms. And they saw plenteous deer, both great and small, and the wild things seemed to fear them but little. To Ralph it seemed an exceeding fair land, and he was as joyous as it was fair. But the lady was pensive, and at last she said, "Thou deemest it fair, and so it is, yet is it the lonesomest of deserts. I deem indeed that it was once one of the fairest lands, with castles and cotes and homesteads all about, and fair people no few, busy with many matters amongst them. But now it is all passed away, and there is no token of a dwelling of man, save it might be that of those mounds we see as yonder, and yonder again, are tofts of house walls, long ago sunken into the earth of the valley, and now few are even hunters or the wayfarers that wend through it." Quoth Ralph, "Thou speakest as if there had been once histories and tales of this pleasant wilderness. Tell me, has it anything to do with that land about the wide river which we went through, Roger and I, as we rode to the Castle of Abundance the other day? For he spoke of tales and deeds and mishaps concerning it." "Yea," she said, "so it is. And the little stream that runs yonder beneath those cliffs is making its way towards that big river aforesaid, which is called the Swelling Flood. Now true it is also that there are many tales about the wars and miseries that turn this land into a desert, and these may be true enough, and belike are true. But these said tales have become blended with the story of those aforesaid wars of the land of the Tower, of which indeed this desert is verily a part, but was desert still in the days when I was queen of the land. So thou mayest well think that they who hold me to be the cause of all this loneliness, and belike Roger thought it was so, have scarce got hold of the very sooth of the matter." "Even so I deemed," said Ralph, "and tomorrow we shall cross the big river, thou and I. Is there a ferry or a ford there whereas we shall come, or how shall we win over it?" She was growing merrier again now, and laughed at this, and said, "O fair boy, the crossing will be tomorrow, and not today. Let tomorrow cross its own rivers, for surely today is fair enough, and fairer shall it be when thou hast been fed, and art sitting by me in rest and peace till tomorrow morning. So now hasten yet a little more, and we will keep the said little stream in sight, as well as we may for the bushes." So they sped on till Ralph said, "Will thy feet never tire, beloved?" "O child," she said, "thou hast heard my story, and mayest well deem that they have wrought many a harder day's work than this day's. And moreover they shall soon rest. For look, yonder is our house for this even, and till tomorrow's sun is high, the house for me and thee, and none else with us." And therewith she pointed to a place where the stream ran in a chain of pools and stickles, and a sheer cliff rose up some 50 paces beyond it. But betwixt the stream and the cliff was a smooth table of greensward, with 3 fair thorn bushes thereon, and it went down at each end to the level of the river's lip by a green slope. But amidst the little green plain was some 10 feet above the stream, and was broken by a little undercliff, which went down sheer into the water. And Ralph saw in the face of the high cliff the mouth of a cave, however deep it might be. "Come," said the lady, "tarry not, for I know that hunger hath hold of thee. And look how long the sun is growing." Then she caught him by the hand, and fell to running with him to the edge of the stream, where at the end of the further slope it ran wide and shallow before it entered into a deep pool overhung with boughs of alder and thorn. She stepped daintily over a row of big stones laid in the rippling shallow, and staying herself in midstream on the biggest of them, and gathering up her gown, looked upstream with a happy face. Then looked she over her shoulder to Ralph and said, "The year has come good to me these seasons, so that when I stayed here on my way to the Castle of Abundance, I found but few stones washed away, and crossed well nigh dry shod. But this stone my feet are standing on now, I brought down from under the cliff, and set it amidst most. And I said that when I brought thee hither, I would stay thereon, and talk with thee while I stood above the freshness of the water, as I am doing now." Ralph looked on her, and strove to answer her, but no words would come to his lips, because of the greatness of his longing. She looked on him fondly, and then stooped to look at the ripples that bubbled up about her shoes, and touched them at whiles. Then she said, "See how they long for the water, these feet that have worn the waste so long, and know how kind it will run over them and lap about them. But ye must abide a little, waste-wearers, till we have done a thing or two. Come, love." And she reached her hand out beside her to Ralph, not looking back. But when she felt his hand touch it, she stepped lightly over the other stones and onto the grass with him, and led him quietly up the slope that went up to the table of the greensward before the cave. But when they came onto the level grass, she kissed him. And then turned she towards the valley and spake solemnly, "May all blessings light on this house of the wilderness, and this hall of summertide, and the chamber of love that here is." Then when she was silent a while, and Ralph brake not the silence, then she turned to him with a face grown merry and smiling, and said, "Lo, how the poor lad yearneth for meat, as well as he may, so long as the day hath been. Ah, beloved, thou must be patient a little, for belike our servants may have not heard of the wedding of us, so we twain must feed each other. Is that so much amiss?" He laughed in her face for love, and took her by the wrist, but she drew her hand away, and went into the cave, and came forth anon holding a copper kettle with an iron bow, and a bag of meal which she laid at his feet. Then she went into the cave again, and brought forth a flask of wine and a beaker. Then she caught up the little cauldron, which was well beaten, and thin and light, and ran down the stream therewith. She came up thence presently, bearing it full of water on her head, going as straight and stately as the spear is seen on a day of tourney, moving over the barriers that hide the knight before he lays it in the rest. She came up to him and set the water kettle before him, and put her hands on his shoulder and kissed his cheek. Then stepped she back from him and smote her palms together and said, "Yea, it is well, but there are yet more things to do before we rest. There is the dighting of the chamber, and the gathering of wood for the fire, and the mixing of the meal, and the kneading and the baking of cakes, and all that is my work. And there is the bringing of the quarry for the roast, and that is thine." Then she ran into the cave, and brought forth a bow and a quiver of arrows, and said, "Art thou somewhat of an archer?" Quoth he, "I shoot not ill." "And I," she said, "shoot well, all woodcraft comes handy to me. But this eve I must trust to thy skill for my supper. Go swiftly, and come back speedily. Do off thine hauberk, and beat the bushes down in the valley, and bring me some small deer, as roe, or hare, or coney, and wash thee in the pool below the stepping stones, as I shall do whiles thou art away. And by then thou comest back, all shall be ready, save the roasting of the venison." So he did off his war gear, but thereafter tarried a little, looking at her, and she said, "What aileth thee not to go? The hunt's up." He said, "I would first go see the rock hall that is for our chamber tonight. Wilt thou not bring me in thither?" "Nay," she said, "for I must be busy about many matters, but thou mayest go by thyself if thou wilt." So he went and stooped down and entered the cave. He found it high and wide within, and clean, and fresh and well-smelling, and the floor of fine white sand without a stain. So he knelt down and kissed the floor, and said aloud, "God bless this floor of the rock hall wherein my love shall lie tonight." Then he arose and went out of the cave, and found the lady at the entry stooping down to see what he would do. And she looked on him fondly and anxiously, but he turned a merry face to her, and caught her round the middle, and strained her to his bosom. Then he took the bow and arrows, and ran down the slope over the stream into the thicket of the valley. He went further than he had looked for, ere he found a prey to his mind, And then he smote a roe with a shaft and slew her, and broke up the carcass and dyed it duly, and so went his ways back. When he came to the stream, he looked up and saw a little fire glittering not far from the cave, but had no clear sight of the lady, though he thought he saw her gown fluttering nigh one of the thorn bushes. Then he did off his raiment and entered that pool of the stream, and was glad to bathe him in the same place where her body had been but of late. For he had noted that the stones of the little shore were still wet with her feet, where she had gone up from the water. But now as he swam and sported in the sun-warmed pool, he deemed he heard the whinnying of a horse, but was not sure. So he held himself still to listen, and heard no more. Then he laughed, and bethought him of Falcon his own steed, and dived down under the water. But as he came up, laughing still and gasping, he heard a noise of the clatter of horse hoofs, as if someone were riding swiftly up the further side of the grassy table, where it was stony, as he had noted when they passed by. A deadly fear fell upon his heart as he thought of his love left all alone. So he gat him at once out of the water, and cast his shirt over his head. But while his arms were yet entangled in the sleeves thereof, came to his ears a great and awful sound of a man's voice roaring out, though there were no shapen words in the roar. Then were his arms free through the sleeves, and he took up the bow and fell to bending it, and even therewith he heard a great wailing of a woman's voice, and she cried out piteously, "Help me! O help, lovely creature of God!" Yet must he needs finish bending the bow, howsoever his heart died within him, or what help would there be of a naked and unarmed man? At last it was bent, and an arrow knocked on the string as he leapt over the river and up the slope. But even as he came up to the pleasant place, he saw all in a moment of time that there stood Silverfax anigh the cave's mouth, and the lady lying on the earth anigh the horse, and betwixt her and him the Knight of the Sun stood up stark, his shining helm on the head, the last rays of the setting sun flashing in the broidered image of his armories. He turned at once upon Ralph, shaking his sword in the air, and there was blood upon the blade, and he cried out in a terrible voice, "The witch is dead, the whore is dead, and thou, thief, who hast stolen her from me and lain her by the wilderness, now shalt thou die as well." Scarce had he spoken, than Ralph drew his bow to the arrowhead and loosed, but there was some 20 paces betwixt them, and the shaft sped by that fell archer, smote the huge man through the eye into the brain, and he fell down along the clattering dead without a word more. But Ralph gave forth a great wail of woe. He ran forward and knelt by the lady, who lay all huddled up face down upon the grass, and he lifted her up and laid her gently on her back. The blood was flowing fast from a great wound in her breast, and he tore off a piece of his shirt to staunch it, but she without knowledge of him breathed forth her last breath ere he could touch the hurt, and he still knelt by her, staring on her as if he knew not what was toward. She had dight her what she could to welcome his return from the hunting, and had set a wreath of meadowsweet on her red hair, and a garland of eglantine about her girdlestead. She had left her feet naked after the pool of the stream, and had turned the bezels of her finger rings outward for joy of that meeting. After a while he rose up with a most bitter cry, and ran down the green slope and over the water. And hither and thither amongst the bushes he ran like one mad, till he became so weary that he might scarce go or stand for weariness. Then he crept back again to the chamber of love, and sat down beside his new-won mate, calling to mind all the wasted words of the day gone by. For the summer night was come now, most fair and fragrant. But he withheld the sobbing passion of his heart, and put forth his hand and touched her, and she was still, and his hand felt her flesh, that it was cold as marble. And he cried out aloud in the night in the wilderness, where there was none to hear him. And he arose and went away from her, passing by Silverfax, who was standing near by, stretching out his head and whinnying at whiles. And he sat on the edge of the green table, and there came up into his mind, despite himself, thoughts of the pleasant fields of Upmeads, and his sports and pleasures there, and the even song of the high house, and the folk of his fellowship and his love. And therewith his breast arose, and his face was wryed, and he wept loud and long, and as if he should never make an end of it. But so weary was he that at last he lay back and fell asleep, and woke not till the sun was high in the heavens. And so it was that his slumber had been so heavy that he knew not at first what had befallen, and one moment he felt glad, and the next as if he should never be glad again, though why he wotted not. Then he turned about and saw Silverfax cropping the grass near by, and the lady lying there like an image that could move no whit, though the world awoke about her. Then he remembered, yet scarce all, so that wild hopes swelled in his heart, and he rose to his knees and turned to her, and called to mind that he should never see her alive again. And sobbing and wailing broke out from him, for he was young and strong, and sorrow dealt hardly with him. But presently he arose to his feet and went hither and thither, and came upon the quenched coals of the cooking fire. She had baked cakes for his eating, and he saw them lying thereby, and hunger constrained him, so he took and ate of them while the tears ran down his face, and mingled with the bread he ate. And when he had eaten, he felt stronger, and therefore was life more grievous to him. And when he thought what he should do, still one thing seemed more irksome than the other. He went down to the water to drink, and passed by the body of the Knight of the Sun, and wrath was fierce in his heart against him who had overthrown his happiness. But when he had drunk and washed his hands and face, he came back again and hardened his heart to do what he must needs do. He took up the body of the lady, and with grief that may not be told of, he drew it into the cave, and cut boughs of trees, and laid them over her face and all her body. And then took he great stones from the scree at the other end of the little plain, and heaped them upon her till she was utterly hidden by them. Then he came out onto the green place, and looked on the body of his foe, and said to himself that all must be decent and in order about the place whereas lay his love. So he came and stood over the body, and said, I have naught to do to hate him now. If he hated me, it was but for a little while, and he knew not of me. So let his bones be covered up from the wolf and the kite, yet shall they not lie alongside her. I will raise a cairn above him here on this little fair plain, which he spoilt of all joy. Therewith he fell to, and straightened his body, and laid his huge limbs together, and closed his eyes, and folded his arms over his breast. And then he piled the stones above him, and went on casting them on the heap a long while after there was need thereof. Ralph had taken his raiment from the stream side, and done them on before this, and now he did on helm and hauberk, and girt his sword to his side. Then, as he was about leaving the sorrowful place, he looked on Silverfax, who had not strayed from the little plain, and came up to him, and did off saddle and bridle. He laid them within the cave, and bade the beast go whither he would. He yet lingered about the place, and looked all around him, and found naught to help him, and could frame in his mind no intent of a deed then, nor any tale of a deed he should do thereafter. Yet belike in his mind were two thoughts, and though neither softened his grief, save a little, he did not shrink from them as he did from all others. And these two were of his home at Upmeads, which was so familiar to him, and of the well at the world's end, which was but a word. Chapter 11. Ralph cometh out of the wilderness. Long he stood, letting these thoughts run through his mind, but at last, when it was now mid-morning, he stirred and gat him slowly down the green slope, and for very pity of himself the tears brake out from him as he crossed the stream and came into the bushy valley. There he stayed his feet a little, and said to himself, And whither then am I going? He thought of the castle of Abundance, and of the champions of the Dry Tree, of Higham and the noble warriors who sat at the Lord Abbot's board, and of the Upmeads and his own folk. But all seemed naught to him, and he thought, And how can I go back and bear folk asking me curiously of my wayfarings, and whether I will do this, that, or the other thing? Withal he thought of that fair damsel, and her sweet mouth in the hostelry of the Burton Abbess, and groaned when he thought of love and its ending. And he said within himself, And now she is a wanderer about the earth as I am. And he thought of her quest, and the chaplet of Dame Catherine, his gossip, which yet bore on his neck. And he deemed that he had not to choose but to go forward and seek that he was doomed to, and now it seemed to him that there was one thing to do and no other. And although this seemed to him but weariness and grief, yet whereas he had ever lightly turned him to doing what work lay ready to hand. So now he knew that he must first of all get him out of that wilderness, that he might hear the talk of folk concerning the well at the world's end, which he doubted not to hear again when he came into the parts inhabited. So now, with his will or without it, his feet bore him on, and he followed up the stream which the lady had said ran into the broad river, called the Swelling Flood. For, thought he, when I come thereabout, I shall presently find some castle or good town, and it is like that either I shall have some tidings of the folk thereof, or else they will compel me to do something, and that will irk me less than doing needs of mine own will. He went his ways till he came to where the wood and the trees ended, and the hills were lower and longer, well grassed with short grass, a down country fit for the feeding of sheep. And indeed some sheep he saw, and a shepherd or two, but far off. At last, after he had left the stream a while, because it seemed to him to turn and wind over so much to the northward, he came upon a road running athwart to the down country, so that he deemed that it must lead one way to the Swelling Flood. So he followed it up, and after a while began to fall in with the folk. The first two companions armed and bearing long swords over their shoulders. He stopped as they met and stared at them in the face, but answered not their greeting. And they had no will to meddle with him, seeing his inches and that he was well armed, and looked no craven. So they went on. Next he came on two women, who had with them an ass between the two panniers, laden with country stuff, and they were sitting by the wayside, one old and the other young. He made no stay for them, and though he turned his face their way, took no heed of them more than they were trees. Though the damsel, who was well liking and somewhat gaily clad, stood up when she saw his face anigh, and drew her gown skirt about her and moved daintily, and sighed and looked after him as he went on, for she longed for him. Yet again came two men a horseback, merchants clad goodly, with three carles, their servants riding behind them, and all these had weapons, and gave little more heed to him than he to them. But a little after they were gone, he stopped and said within himself, Maybe I had better have gone their way, on this road doubtless leadeth to some place of resort. But even therewith he heard horse hoofs behind him, and anon came a man on horseback, armed with jack and sallay, a long spear in his hand, and budgets at his saddle-bow, who looked like some lord's man going a message. He nodded to Ralph, who gave him good day, for seeing these folks and their ways had by now somewhat amended his mind, and he now turned not, but went on as before. At last the way clomb a hill longer and higher than any he had yet crossed, and when he had come to the brow and looked down, he saw the big river close below the running through the wide valley, which he had crossed with Roger on that other day. Then he sat down on the green bank above the way, so heavy of heart that not one of the things he saw gave him any joy, and the world was naught to him. But within a while he came somewhat to himself, and looking down toward the river, he saw that where the road met it, it was very wide, and shallow withal, for the waves rippled merrily and glittered in the afternoon sun, though there was no wind. Moreover, the road went up white from the water on the other side, so he saw clearly that this was the ford of a highway. The valley was peopled withal. On the other side of the river was a little thorp, and there were carts and sheds scattered about the hither side, and sheep and neat feeding in the meadows, and in short it was another world from the desert. Chapter 12. Ralph falleth in with friends, and rideth to Whitwall. Ralph looked unto the ford, and saw folk riding through the thorp aforesaid and down to the river. And they took the water, and were many in company, some 200 by his deeming, and he saw the sun glittering on their weapons. Now he thought that he would abide their coming, and see if he might join their company, since if he crossed the water, he would be on the backward way. And it was but a little while ere the head of them came up over the hill, and were presently going past Ralph, who rose up and looked on them, and be seen of them. But they took little heed of him. So he saw that though they all bore weapons, they were not at all men at arms, nay, not more than 50, but those proper men enough. Of the others, some half-dozen seemed by their attire to be merchants, and the rest their lads, and withal they had many sumpter horses and mules with them. They greeted him not, nor he them, nor did he heed them much till they were all gone by, save three. And then he leapt into the road with a cry, for who should be riding there but Blaise, his eldest brother, and Richard the Red with him, both in good case by seeming, for Blaise was clad in a black coat welted with gold, and rode a good grey palfrey, and Richard was armed well and knightly. They knew him at once, and drew rein, and Blaise lighted down from his horse, and cast his arms upon Ralph, and said, "O happy day, when two of Upmead's kindred meet thus in an alien land! But what maketh thee here, Ralph? I thought of thee as merry and safe in Upmeads." Ralph said smiling, for his heart leapt at the sight of his kindred, "Nay, must I not seek adventures like the rest? So I stole myself away from father and mother." "Ill done, little lord," said Blaise, stroking Ralph's cheek. Then up came Richard, and if Blaise were glad, Richard was twice glad, and quoth he, "Said I not, Lord Blaise, that this chick would be the hardest of all to keep under the coop? Welcome to the highways, Lord Ralph. But where is thine horse, and whence and whither is it now? Hast thou met with some foil and been held ransom?" Ralph found it hard and grievous and dull to work the answer, for now again his sorrow had taken hold of him. So he said, "Yea, Richard, I have had adventures, and have lost rather than won. But at least I am a free man, and have spent but little gold on my loss." "That is well," said Richard, "but whence gat ye any gold for spending?" Ralph smiled, but sadly, for he called to mind the glad setting forth, and the kind face of Dame Catherine his gossip. And he said, "Clement Chapman deemed it not unmeet to stake somewhat on my luck, therefore I am no pauper." "Well," said Blaise, "if thou hast no great errand elsewhere, thou mightest ride with us, brother. I have had good hap in these days, though scarce kingly or knightly, for I have been buying and selling. What matter? Few know Upmeads, and its kings to wight me with fouling a fair name. Richard, go fetch a horse hither for Lord Ralph's riding, and we will tarry no longer." So Richard trotted on, and while they abode him, Ralph asked after his brethren, and Blaise told him that he had seen or heard not of them. Then Ralph asked of whither away, and Blaise told him to Whitwall, where was much recourse of merchants from many lands, and a noble market. Back then cometh Richard, leading a good horse, while Ralph was pondering his matter, and thinking that at such a town he might well hear tidings concerning the Well at the World's End. Thus Ralph mounted, and they all rode away together. On the way, partly for brotherhood's sake, and partly that he might not be questioned overmuch himself, Ralph asked Blaise to tell him more of his farings. And Blaise said that when he had left Upmeads, he had ridden with Richard up and down and round about, till he came to a rich town which had been just taken in war, and that the companions who had conquered it were looking for chapmen to cheapen their booty, and that he was the first, or nearly the first to come, who had will and money to buy, and the companions who were eager to depart had sold him thieves' pennyworths, so that his share of the Upmeads treasure had gone far. And thence he had gone to another good town, where he had best of markets for his newly cheapened wares, and he had brought more there, such as he deemed handy to sell, and had so gone on from town to town that he had ever thriven, and had got much wealth. And at last, having heard tell of Whitwall as better for chaffer than all he had yet seen, he and other chapmen had armed them, and waged men-at-arms to defend them, and so tried the adventure of the wild woods, and come safe through. Then at last came the question to Ralph concerning his adventures, and he enforced himself to speak, and told all as truly as he might, without telling of the lady and her woeful ending. Thus they gave and took in talk, and Ralph did what he might to seem like other folk, that he might nurse his grief in his own heart, as far asunder from other men as might be. So they rode on till it was 7, and came to Whitwall before the shutting of the gates. They rode into the street, and found it a fair and great town, well defensible, with high and new walls, and men-at-arms good store to garnish them. Ralph rode with his brother to the hostel of the chapmen, and there they were well lodged. Chapter 13. Richard talketh with Ralph concerning the well at the world's end, concerning Swevenham. On the morrow Blaise went to his chaffer, and to visit the men of the port of the Guildhall. He bade Ralph come with him, but he would not, but abode in the hall of the hostel, and sat pondering sadly while men came and went. But he heard no word spoken of the well at the world's end. And likewise passed the next day and the next, save that Richard was among those who came into the hall, and he talked long with Ralph at whiles. That is to say, that he spake, and Ralph made semblance of listening. Now, as is aforesaid, Richard was old and wise, and he loved Ralph much, more belike than Lord Blaise his proper master, whereas he had no mind for chaffer or aught pertaining to it. He took heed of Ralph, and saw that he was sad and weary-hearted. So on the 6th day of their abiding at Whitwall, in the morning when all the chapmen were gone about their business, and he and Ralph were left alone in the hall, he spake to Ralph, and said, This is no prison, lord. Even so, quoth Ralph. Nay, if thou doubtest it, said Richard, let us go to the door, and try if they have turned the key, and shot the bolt on us. Ralph smiled faintly, and stood up, and said, I will go with thee if thou willest it, but sooth to say, I shall be but a dull fellow of thine today. Said Richard, Wouldst thou have been better yesterday, lord, or the day before? Nay, said Ralph. Wilt thou be better tomorrow? Said Richard. Ralph shook his head. Said Richard, Yea, but thou wilt be, or thou mayest call me a fool else. Thou art kind, Richard, said Ralph, and I will come with thee, and do what thou biddest me, but I must needs tell thee that my heart is sick. Yea, quoth Richard, and thou needest not tell me so much, dear youngling. He who runs might read that in thee. But come forth. So into the street they went, and Richard brought Ralph into the market-place, and showed him where was Blaise's booth, for he was thriving greatly. But Ralph would not go anigh it, lest his brother should entangle him in talk. And they went into the Guildhall, which was both great and fair, and the smell of the new-shaven oak, for the roof was not yet painted, brought back to Ralph's mind the days of his childhood, when he was hanging about the buildings of the Water-Reeves' new house at Upmeads. Then they went into the great church, and heard a mass at the altar of St. Nicholas, Ralph's very friend. And then said church was great to the letter, and very goodly, and somewhat new also, since the blossom tide of Whitwall was not many years old. And the altars of its chapels were beyond anything for fairness that Ralph had seen, save at Higham on the way. But when they came forth from the church, Ralph looked on Richard with a face that was both blank and weary, as who should say, What to do now? And forsooth, so woebegone he looked, that Richard, despite his sorrow and trouble for him, could scarcely withhold his laughter. But he said, Well, foster son, for thou art pretty much at me, since the good town pleasureth thee little, go we further afield. So he led him out of the market-place, and brought him to the east gate of the town, which hight Petergate Bar. And forth they went, and out into the meadows under the walls, and stayed him at a little bridge over one of the streams, for it was a land of many waters. There they sat down in a nook, and spake Richard to Ralph, saying, Lord Ralph, ill it were if the Upmeads kindred came to naught, or even to little. Now as for my own master Blaise, he hath, so please you, the makings of a noble chapman, but not of a noble knight, though he saith that when he is right rich he will cast aside all chaffer, not of which he will do. As for the others, my Lord Gregory is no better, or indeed worse, save that he shall not be rich ever, having no mastery over himself, while Lord Hugh is like to be slain in some empty brawl, unless he come back speedily to Upmeads. Yea, yea, said Ralph. What then? I came not hither to hear thee missay my mother's sons. But Richard went on, As for thee, Lord Ralph, of thee I looked for something, but now I cannot tell. For the heart in thee seemeth to be dead, and thou must look to it lest the body die also. So be it, said Ralph. Said Richard, I am old now, but I have been young, and many things have I seen and suffered ere I came to Upmeads. Old am I, and I cannot feel certain hopes and griefs as a young man can. Yet have I bought the knowledge of them dear enough, and have not forgotten. Whereby I wot well that thy dreary head is concerning a woman, is it not so? Yea, quoth Ralph. Said Richard, now shalt thou tell me thereof, and so lighten thine heart a little. I will not tell thee, said Ralph, or rather, to speak more truly, I cannot. Yea, said Richard, and though it were now an easier thing for me to tell thee of the griefs of my life, than for thee to hearken to the tale, yet I believe thee. But mayhappen thou mayest tell me of one thing that thou desirest more than another. Said Ralph, I desire to die, and the tears started in his eyes therewith. But Richard spake, smiling on him kindly, That way is open for thee on any day of the week. Why hast thou not taken it already? But Ralph answered not. Richard said, Is it not because thou hopest to desire something, if not today, then tomorrow, or the next day or the next? Still Ralph spake no word, but he wept. Quoth Richard, Maybe I may help thee to a hope, though thou mayest think my words wild. In the land and in the thorp where I was born and bred, there was talk now and again of a thing to be sought, which should cure sorrow, and make life blossom in the old, and uphold life in the young. Yea, said Ralph, looking upon him from his tears, and what was that? And why hast thou never told me thereof before? Nay, said Richard, and why should I tell it to a merry lad I knew in Upmeads? But now thou art a man, and hast seen the face of sorrow. It is meet that thou shouldest hear of the well at the world's end. Ralph sprang to his feet as he said the word, and cried out eagerly, Old friend, and where then wert thou bred and born? Richard laughed and said, See then, there is yet a deed and a day betwixt thee and death. But turn about and look straight over the meadows in a line with yonder willow tree, and tell me what thou seest. Said Ralph, The fair plain spreading wide, and a river running through it, and little hills beyond the water, and blue mountains beyond them, and snow yet lying on the tops of them, though the year is in young July. Yea, quoth Richard, and seest thou on the first of the little hills beyond the river a great grey tower rising up, and houses anigh it? Yea, said Ralph, the tower I see in the houses, for I am far-sighted, but the houses are small. So it is, said Richard. Now yonder tower is of the church of the Swevenham, which is under the invocation of the 7 sleepers of Ephesus, and the houses are the houses of the little town. And what hast thou to do with me? Sayest thou, Why this, that I was born and bred at Swevenham. And indeed I it was who brought my Lord Blaise here to Whitewall, with tales of how good a place it was for chaffer, that I might see the little town and the great grey tower once more. Forsooth I lied not, but thy brother is happy here, whereas he is piling up the coins one upon the other. Forsooth thou shouldest go into the booth, fair lord, it is a goodly sight. But Ralph was walking to and fro hastily, and he turned to Richard and said, Well, well, but why dost thou not tell me more of the well at the world's end? Said Richard, I was going to tell thee somewhat which might be worth thy noting, or might not be worth it. Hearken, when I dwelt at Swevenham over yonder, and was but of 18 winters, who am now of 68, 3 folk of our township, 2 young men and 1 young woman, set out thence to seek the said well, and much lore they had concerning it, which they had learned of an old man, a nigh kinsman of one of them. This ancient carle I had never seen, for he dwelt in the mountains away off, and these men were some 5 years older than I, so that I was a boy when they were men grown. And such things I heeded not, but rather sport and play. And above all, I longed for the play of war and battle. God wot, I have had my belly full of it since those days. Howbeit I mind the setting forth of these 3. They had a sumpter ass with them for their livelihood on the waste, but they went afoot crowned with flowers, and the pipe and tabor playing before them, and much people brought them on the way. By St. Christopher, I can see it all as if it were yesterday. I was sorry of the departure of the damsel, for though I was a boy, I had loved her, and she had suffered me to kiss her and toy with her, but it was soon over. Now I call to mind that they had prayed our priest, Sir Cyprian, to bless them on their departure. But he naysayed them, for he held that such a request came of the inspiration of the devils, and was but a memory of the customs of the ancient Gentiles and heathen. But as to me, I deemed it not, and was sorry that my white-bosomed, sweet-breathed friend should walk away from me and thus into the clouds. "What came of it?" said Ralph. "Did they come back, or any of them?" "I wot not," said Richard, "for I was weary of Swevenham after that. So I girt myself to a sword, and laid a spear upon my shoulder, and went my ways to the castle of the Waste March, 60 miles from Swevenham town. And the Baron took me in, and made me his man. And almost as little profit were in my telling thee again of my deeds there, as there was in my doing them. But the grey tower of Swevenham I have never seen again till this hour." Said Ralph, "Now then it behoveth me to go to Swevenham straightway. Wilt thou come with me? It seemeth to be but some 4 miles hence." Richard held his peace, and knit his brows as if pondering the matter, and Ralph abided till he spake. So he said, "Foster son, so to call thee, thou knowest the manner of up-country carles, that tales flow forth from them the better if they come without overmuch digging and hoeing of the ground. That is, without questioning. So meseems better if it will be I go to Swevenham alone, and better if I be asked to go than if I go of myself. Now tomorrow is Saturday, in High Market in Whitwall, and I am not so old but that is the likeliest that there is will be some of my fellows alive, and be on their legs in Swevenham. And if such there be, there will be one at the least in the market tomorrow, and I will be there to find him out. And then it will go hard if he bring me not to Swevenham as a well-beloved guest. And when I am there, and telling my tidings and asking them of theirs, if there be any tales concerning the Well at the World's End working in their bellies, then shall I be the midwife, and bring them to birth. Huh? Will it do?" "Yea," said Ralph, "but how long wilt thou be?" Said Richard, "I shall come back speedily, if I find the land barren. But if the field be in ear, I shall tarry to harvest it. So keep thou thy soul in patience." "And what shall I do now?" said Ralph. "Wear away the hours," said Richard. "And to begin with, come back within the gates with me, and let us go look at thy brother's booth in the market-place. It is the nethermost of a goodly house, which he is minded to dwell in, and he will marry a wife, and sit down in Whitwall, so well he seemeth to like to thrive. For they have already bidden him to the freedom of the city, and to a brother of the faring knights, whereas he is not only a stirring man, but of a good lineage also. For now he hideth not that he is of the Upmeads kindred." Chapter 14. Ralph falleth in with another old friend. Ralph went with Richard now without more words, and they came into the market-place and unto Blaise's booth and house, which was no worse than the best in the place. And the painters and stainers were at work on the upper part of it, to make it as bright and goodly as might be with red and blue and green and gold, and all fair colours. And already was there a sign hung from it of the fruitful tree by the water-side. As for the booth, it was full within of many wares and far-fetched and dear-bought things, as pieces of good and fine cloth, plumped with the seal of the greatest of the cities, and silk of Babylon, and spices of the hot-burning islands, and wonders of the silversmiths and the goldsmiths' fashioning, and fair-wrought weapons and armour of the best, and everything that a rich chapman may deal in. And amidst of it all stood Blaise, clad in fine black cloth welted with needlework, and a gold chain about his neck. He was talking with 3 honourable men of the port, and they were doing him honour with kind words and the bidding of help. When he saw Ralph and Richard come in, he nodded to them as to men whom he loved, but were beneath him in dignity, and left not talking with the great men. Richard grinned a little thereat, as also did Ralph in his heart, for he thought, "Here then is one of the Upmeads' kins provided for, so that soon he may buy with his money 2 domains as big as Upmeads, and call them his manors." Now Ralph looked about him, and presently he saw a man come forward to meet him with the innermost of the booth. And lo, there was come Clement Chapman. His heart rose at the sight of him, and he thought of his kind gossip, till he could scarce withhold his tears. But Clement came to him, and cast his arms about him, and kissed him, and said, "Thou shalt pardon me for this, lord, for it is the kiss of the gossip which she bade me give thee, if I fell in with thee, as now I have. Praised be the saints! Yet it irks me that I shall see little more of thee at this time, for tomorrow early I must needs join myself to my company, for we are going south a while to a good town some 50 miles hence. Nevertheless, if thou dwellest here some 8 days, I shall see thee again belike, since thereafter I get me eastward on hard and long journey, not without peril. How sayest thou? I wot not, quoth Ralph, looking at Richard. Said Richard, Thou mayest wot well, Master Clement, that my lord is unhungered of the praise of the folks, and is not like to abide in a mere merchant town till the mould grow on his back. Well, well, said Clement, however that may be, I have now done my matters with this cloth lord, Blaise, and he is my florins in his pouch. So will not ye twain come with me and drink a cup till he hath done his talk with these magnates? Ralph was nothing loath, for besides that he loved Master Clement, and that he being in company was like having a piece of his home anigh him, he hoped to hear him some tidings concerning the Well at the World's End. So he and Richard went with Master Clement to the Christopher, a fair ale-house over against the great church, and sat down to good wine. And Ralph asked of Clement many things concerning Dame Catherine his gossip, and Clement told him all, and that she was well, and had been to Upmeads, and had seen King Peter and the mother of Ralph, and how she had assuaged his mother's grief at his departure by forecasting fair days for her son. All this Ralph heard gladly, though he was somewhat shamefaced withal, and sat silent and thinking of many matters. But Richard took up the word and said, Which way camest thou from Wulstead, Master Clement? The nighest way I came, said Clement, through the woods perilous. Said Richard, And they of the Dry Tree, heardest thou aught of them? Yea, certes, quoth Clement, for I fell in with their bailiff, and paid him due scot for the passage of the wood. He knoweth me withal, and we talked together. And had he any tidings to tell thee of the champions? Said Richard. Said Clement, Great tidings, maybe, how that there was a rumour that they had lost their young queen and lady, and if that be true, it will go nigh to break their hearts, so sore as they loved her, and that will make them bitter and fierce, till their grief has been slaked by the blood of men, and that the more as their old queen abideth still, and she herself is ever of that mind. Ralph hearkened, and his heart was wounded that other men should speak of his beloved. But he heard how Richard said, Hast thou ever known what thy company of champions took the name of the Dry Tree? Why, who should know that, if thou knowest it not, Richard of Swevenham, said Clement? Is it not by the token of the Dry Tree that standeth in the lands on the hither side of the wall of the world? Richard nodded his head, but Ralph cried out, O Master Clement, and hast thou seen it, the wall of the world? Yea, afar off, my son, said he. O what the folk with me called so, as the Dry Tree, I have told thee at Wulstead that I have seen it not, though I have known men who have told me that they have seen it. And must they who find the Well at the World's End come by the Dry Tree? Yea, surely, said Clement. Quoth Richard, and thus have some heard who have gone on that quest, and they have heard of the champions of Hampton, and have gone thither, being deceived by that name of the Dry Tree, and whiles have been slain by the champions, whiles they have entered their company. Yea, said Clement, so is it that their first error hath ended their quest. But now, Lord Ralph, I will tell thee one thing, to wit, that when I return hither after my 8 days' wearing, I shall be wending east, as I said and now, and what will that mean save going somewhat nigher to the wall of the world? For my way lieth beyond the mountains that ye see from hence, and beyond the mountains that lie the other side of those. And I bid thee come with us, and I will be thy warrant that so far shalt thou have no harm. But when thou hast come so far, and hast seen 3 very fair cities, besides towns and castles and thorps and strange men, and fair merchandise, God forbid that thou shouldest wend further, and so cast away thy young life for a gay-coloured cloud. Then will be the time to come back with me, that I may bring thee through the perils of the way to Wulstead and Upmeads at last, and the folk that love thee. Richard held his peace at this word, but Ralph said, I thank thee, Master Clement, for thy love and thy helping hand, and I will promise thee to abide thee here 8 days at the least, and meanwhile I will ponder the matter well. Chapter 15. Ralph dreams a dream, or sees a vision. Therewithal they parted after more talk concerning small matters, and Ralph wore through the day. But Richard again did him to wit, that on the morrow he would find his old friends of Swevenham in the market. And Ralph was come to life again, more than he had been since that evil hour in the desert, though hard and hard he deemed it that he should never see his love again. Now, as befalleth young men, he was a good sleeper, and dreamed but seldom, save such light and empty dreams as he might laugh at. If perchance he remembered them, by then his raiment was on him in the morning. But that night him seemed that he awoke in his chamber at Whitwall, and was lying on his bed, as he verily was, and the door of the chamber opened. And there entered quietly the Lady of the Woodland, dight even as he had seen her as she lay dead beside their cooking fire on that table of greensward in the wilderness, barefoot and garlanded about her brow, and her girdlestead but fair and fresh coloured, as she was before the sword had pierced her side. And he thought that he rejoiced to see her, but no wild hope rose in his heart, and no sobbing passion blinded his eyes. Nor did he stretch out hand to touch her, because he remembered that she was dead. But he thought she spake to him, and said, I know that thou wouldest have me speak, therefore I say that I am come to bid thee farewell, since there was no farewell between us in the wilderness. And I know that thou art about going on a long and hard and perilous journey, and I would that I could kiss thee and embrace thee, but I may not, for this is but the image of me as thou hast known me. Furthermore, as I loved thee when I saw thee first, for thy youth, and thy fairness, and thy kindness, and thy valiancy, so now I rejoice that all this shall endure so long in thee, as it surely shall. Then the voice ceased, but still the image stood before him a while, and he wondered if she would speak again, and tell him aught of the way to the well at the world's end. And she spake again. Nay, she said, I cannot, since we may not tread the way together, hand in hand. This is part of the loss that thou hast had of me, and oh, but it is hard and hard. And her face became sad and distressful, and she turned and departed as she had come. Then he knew not if he awoke, or if it were a change in his dream, but the chamber became dark about him, and he lay there thinking of her, till as it seemed day began to dawn, and there was some little stir in the world without, and the new wind moved the casement. And again the door opened, and someone entered as before, and this also was a woman, green-clad she was and barefoot, yet he knew at once that it was not his love that was dead, but the damsel of the alehouse of Burton, whom he had last seen by the wantways of the Wood Perilous. And he thought her wondrous fair, fairer than he had deemed. And the word came from her, I am sending of the woman whom thou hast loved, and I should not have been here save she had sent me. Then the words ended, while he looked at her and wondered if she had died on the way to the well at the world's end. And it came into his mind that he had never known her name upon the earth. Then again came the word, So it is that I am not dead but alive in the world, though I am far away from this land. And it is good that thou shouldest go seek the well at the world's end, not all alone. And the seeker may find me, and whereas thou wouldest know my name, I hight Dorothea. So fell the words again, and this image stood a while as the other had done, and as the other had done departed. And once more the chamber became dark, so that Ralph could not so much as see where was the window, and he knew no more till he woke in the early morn. And there was stir in the street, and the voice of men, and the scent of fresh herbs and worts and fruits, for it was market day, and the country folk were early afoot, that they might array their wares timely in the marketplace. This is the end of chapters 10 through 15 of Book 2 of The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris. In the next video we will proceed to chapter 16 of The Tales of Swevenham. Thank you for listening.